Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to North Sail's latest webinar um, on the J class with a host of experts to tell everybody what it's like to sail on these J boats. For those of you who think you're at a J22 or J24 webinar, this is not that J class. This is a slightly different J class. These are the big boys, and I'm really pleased that we're going to be able to take an hour or so and explain to you what it's like to sail on these monsters. Listen, we are obviously in a crazy time, and we are proud to keep bringing entertainment and education through a whole host of subjects, all relating to our sport, the sport that we love and the sport that we can't wait to get back out there and participate in. It's going to happen. It's going to happen soon. We were just talking here in Newport, Rhode Island, where I am. For the first time in a long time, it kind of feels like a normal day, and that's a good sign. And this sailing right here that we're all watching, this is what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the J class and how the J class has evolved into the modern sailing that it does today. And we're really, really fortunate to have a great group with a ton of different, a variety of tons of experience on board all kinds of different boats, but obviously the modern J class and different versions of what we do on the boats as well. So again, I'm Ken Reed. I'm the strategist on Svea and also skippered Hanneman for a number of years. We're really happy to have Bauer Becking. Most of you may know him a little more so for his offshore prowess and going around the world. I think he even lost count how many times. But as the tactician on Lionheart, they won the World Championship 2 years ago and won the inaugural Kohler Cup, which is the season championship that year. Peter Holmberg, silver medalist in the Finn class. Not many boats that Peter hasn't made go fast over the years, and as the helmsman of Topaz, this is I think it's a different world for Peter, and I can't wait to hear his opinion on what it's like to steer these monsters. Tom Dodson. Tom has been sailing on Balshida for a number of years, New Zealand legend. Again, like all of our panelists, there's not many boats that Tom hasn't competed on around the world in so many different events. He worked with North Sails in the past and Southern Spars in the past, and as the tactician on Balshida, they're constantly the boat to beat out on the water. And then finally, Greg Sloat, my friend Greg Sloat, who we think we sailed together for 8 or 9 years on Hanneman. He was the boat captain on Hanneman. Put the boat together as we always joked. He made it perfect, and then the race crew came on board and tried to wreck it all the time. Greg has now moved on and is in the mix of doing a real rebuild on Ranger. So it'll be great to hear Greg's inside information as to how the inner workings of these boats. So we have a real variety of different opinion, and it'll be really fun to get everybody's take on what it's like to sail these boats. But first, I think it's really important, before we talk about the J class, you got to talk about the history. And the history of the J class is really incredible. It was one of the few classes that has been used in the America's Cup. Now, it was only used for approximately 10 years, 3 America's Cups and over a 10-year span, all during the 1930s. A bunch of boats were built. Actually, it was the day and age, it was when the America's Cup actually had more defenders vying for the Cup than there were challengers. So in the first J class, and by the way, this was also the first 3 America's Cups that were ever held in Newport, Rhode Island. Now, I was a history major in college, and I barely made it through college. So if I butcher a little bit of this history, please don't hang me for it. The very first J-class America's Cup was Enterprise versus Shamrock 5. And this was a bit of a mismatch because unfortunately, the Brits, or actually they came from Northern Ireland. This team was a Northern Irish team. Came in a wooden boat with a wooden spar, thinking they're going to sail on a classic event. Enterprise was the first of the Vanderbilt boats, Vanderbilt-owned boats, and it showed up with, I believe, the first aluminum mast ever made. And they had some crazy. It was also the first time that the Cup had never used gaff rigs. So all kinds of innovation, which as we talk about innovation, it'll actually give you an idea of how crazy the innovation is in the modern day boats. Shamrock 5 was not competitive. Poor Thomas Lipton, again, I think he challenged 3 or 4 times, and this one went down to a crushing 4-0 defeat to the Vanderbilts. That was in 1930. We move on to 1934.
We're taking you on board Rainbow, America's Cup defender, and showing you some intimate pictures of her in her trial against Yankee. Her skipper, Mr. Vanderbilt, is at the helm, whilst the crew with a hand winch sheets in the mainsail. Rainbow has a sail area of 7,555 square feet and a 165-foot mainmast, down which you can get a bird's eye view of the yacht. She beat Yankee by just 1 second, and so's chosen to meet the challenger. And now let's take you on board Mr. T.O.M. Sopwith's Endeavour. The amateur crew are hoisting sail for a tryout in American waters, whilst at the helm is Mr. Sopwith, who will skipper her in her attempt to wrest from America that elusive trophy. The crew are on their toes all the time, working with a will that makes for success. Look down her steel mast. See the beautiful lines of her hull. She's an odds-on favourite, and all England will wish Mr. Sopwith and his amateur crew the best of luck in their sporting effort.
So the interesting part of that, and if I can, I might try to stop this for a second. The interesting part of that cup, that was in 1934. Endeavour and T.O.M. Sopwith lost to Rainbow 4-2, but they actually jumped out to a 2-0 lead. And one of the problems with Endeavour was, and it was mentioned 2 or 3 times in that clip, was that they had an amateur crew because their professional crew went on a pay strike just before the event, and it was a totally different crew. So guys, just tell your teams no pay strikes, because this goes bad. So anyway, it was really considered that was one of the U.S. defenses that should not have been defended. That Endeavour was the better boat that time around. So really interesting. Now we move on. That was 1934, and we move on to 1937, the third of the 3 cups that were done in J class, in the J class. Whoops. Try to get this right. So this is no volume on this, because it was just the volume was just a propeller of an airplane that was actually taking this. Ranger versus Endeavour 2. Sopwith came back for a second time after the crushing defeat the time before. Ranger was the third Vanderbilt boat, Harold Vanderbilt, and this time around, it was not as good for Sopwith, and Ranger beat Endeavour 2 4-0 in this event. Again, it's just some fascinating, again, the innovation. You looked at that boom a second ago, and everything on these boats, as old as it seems, a little bit of sail area, they don't mind going dead downwind in these boats, that's for sure. Park Avenue boom, the original Park Avenue boom. That's Vanderbilt. So next time, Peter Holmberg, as you're driving the boat, you got to have a pipe in your mouth. I think that's the way it's very authentic, and it works. And like I said, Ranger went on to win 4-0. It was also one of the first times, it may have been the first time in history, that tank testing came into effect, because Vanderbilt had Sterling Burgess and the young Olin Stevens actually do 4 tank tests apiece before he came up with what Ranger was to be. So those were the only 3 cups, the first 3 cups here in Newport, Rhode Island. And you know what? People were pretty famous back then for sailing. And you know, I guess part of this is, in some way, times haven't changed, because the modern day owners of the J class are modern day business leaders in their own rights. So it's fascinating how some traditions continue. As we move along very quickly, we skip through a world war and a number of years. By the way, it was 21 years after the 1937 America's Cup. It was 21 years until the 12 meters restarted the America's Cup here in Newport. So as we go through the whole 12-meter era, along comes Elizabeth Meyer. Elizabeth Meyer is a local here in town. The Museum of Yachting was one of her babies. The International Yacht Restoration School was something that she originally started or helped start. And Elizabeth decided that she wanted to resurrect Endeavor. And this was Endeavor found, and Greg, I'm going to pull you in here. Endeavor, I believe, was found on the Hamble River.
Yeah, correct. She was found there. She was being used as a houseboat, no keel left on it or anything. She was then, the hull was fixed enough in England to move it to the Netherlands, where she was fully restored there, and then brought and started world cruising and racing.
Well, it's pretty, Elizabeth Meyer had some passion, and she had some patience, and she probably had something, maybe a little bit of money as well, because that's what a fully restored J-class boat looks like after being derelict and left for dead. And here we are, the modern J-class. I believe many people feel is born. Elizabeth also did a major restoration on Shamrock, and Shamrock is one of these 2 boats are 2 of 3 original boats. All the rest of the boats are replicas made off of original lines plans, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But Shamrock was one of the 3, was the only one that was never really ever left for dead, ever derelict, ever laying on the bottom in a mud pit or anything like that. It was actively sold, almost scrapped a couple times, but Shamrock 5 still lives and breathes today, and has, I can't tell you how many restorations it's probably gone through, but it is as spectacular as you could ever imagine when you see it in person. So Tom, and then we move on to Valshita, with the 3rd of the only original ones left. And this is an original photo of Valshita. I have no idea where it is and no idea the history of it. So do you have a little bit of a insight for us?
Yeah, thanks, Kenny. The photo will definitely be from the south of England, because Valshita was the only J that was not built to compete in the America's Cup. So the owner, Mr. Stevenson, W.L. Stevenson, he had it built in 1933, and he just wanted to race against the other J's in the south of England. In the second season, they won 40 races, so and that was against Endeavour, Shamrock 5, and Britannia still then. So he bought it and raced it in the south of England, and then in the other interesting thing, the name Valshita, that comes from a combination of his 3 daughters' names, Valerie, Sheeta, and Daphne. And then
wow,
yeah,
Tom,
Did you
You've
know
really
that?
broken out some good stuff here. This is good. Very,
Yeah,
you're
so
raising the bar here for everybody else. I hope the rest of you guys have done some good homework.
well, his family might have been complaining about how he was spending the money or something. So he must have said, "Lord, if I name it after the girls," and they said, "Okay, Dad." And then yeah, it along with the other boats got sort of decommissioned in 1937. Only had 3 or 4 seasons of racing. They did a lot of racing though around England, and then and it was left in the mud in the Hamble River, and the mud must have been a pretty good sort of a place to leave it, because in 1984 it was pulled out again by another gentleman from England, and he started to race it around the south coast. Well, more charter work, I guess. It didn't have an engine in it. It was pretty rudimentary, but they sailed it a lot. And then he kind of ran out of enthusiasm for it. And then in 1996, the current owner, Mr. DeVale, bought it and had a major, as you can see it on screen there now. It's a stunning boat now, and it had a huge refit in the south of England again. And now you see it, and he's campaigned it since then. Every single year we do 3, 4, sometimes 5 regattas. The regular crew keep it immaculately. It's getting updated with sails, obviously. Just got new rigging this year, but most of the stuff you see there is from the mid-90s.
Fantastic, gorgeous, and still in many people's view the boat to beat. So those are the 3 original boats. Now let's move on to the actual. Even though Endeavour and Valshita are very competitive, it's probably fair to say that Shamrock 5 has never, even when you go back to when it was in the Cup itself, it's a wood boat, I believe, and Valshita's steel.
Valshita's steel, and Stars Endeavour, yeah.
So
and Ranger is as well, actually.
Right. So now we go on to the modern boats, and every boat besides those 3 are replicas. And Greg, bring you back in again for a second. Can you explain to us the rule as to what makes a modern J boat and how that's decided?
So when you want to build a replica, you've got to go back and get an original hull lines drawing that was passed through the class. So there was all the boats that were built, and then there were a few boats that were never built, but the hull shapes were passed through the class. You get approval from the class to do it. You can only add 100 millimeters of freeboard. Other than that, the hull shape, well, aside from a propeller as well, has to be identical to the original boat. And then there's the modern J-class rule that defines sail sizes and all of that.
So this is Rainbow, just as an example, and Rainbow, so the original Rainbow is long gone, even after it won an America's Cup in 1934. Here's the new Rainbow. Just, I guess the one thing that not a single human on the planet disagrees with is the sheer beauty and elegance of these boats, and all these replicas have been done, I mean, so perfectly. The boat builds themselves are unbelievably perfect. Moving on, Greg, this is your new toy, Ranger. Tell us a little bit about Ranger.
So Kenny covered a little bit of Ranger earlier with Mr. Vanderbilt having this being the 3rd boat. Back in the day, these boats were just race boats that got, then they moved on to the next one. With Ranger, built in 1937, he mentioned the tank testing. They didn't even decide which of those 8 hulls to build until January. The boat was already launched May 11th. She lost her rig on the first delivery, and she was already racing the Cup by August. these things, they worked them up pretty quick. But interesting thing was, they took pieces off the old boats to build the next boat. The same wheel was used on Enterprise in 1930, Rainbow in 34, and Ranger. The mast from Rainbow was originally used on Ranger. They used a lot of that stuff. Then Ranger got rebuilt as a recreation rather, in 2003, built in Denmark. As was mentioned, she had to be built in steel, which is still, tough. She's a big girl. She's heavy. She's now in refit in Holland, and we've been doing a lot of work to her, but keeping it Ranger. That was really important to the new owner, was to keep the heritage of Ranger. One other thing that was interesting when talking about all the old boats being scrapped, all of the USJs were scrapped for World War I for the lead and the steel. Yeah, hopefully Ranger will be launched again soon.
Awesome. We can't wait to see it. Bauer, the current J-class world champion, Lionheart.
Yeah, I think Lionheart is a complete different beast actually than what people would have expected, because this was actually the first J what they allowed to build in aluminum. There was one really crazy guy in Holland, the owner, very nice guy actually. He just had the dream of sailing a J-class, but he just knew there was no J-class available anymore. And he bumped into Andre Hoek from Hoek Design. And Andre's office had just launched a couple of really big boats. And he just said to Andre, I want to have a boat, but you have to find me which ones are available, which line plans are available. And what we heard before, the owner of Ranger, Mr. Vanderbilt, he had 8 boats in total. He made the water lines from it, from Burgess and from Stevens. And Andre got hold of the plans. The boats were not built. And he used all the new technologies, using CFDs, used tank test models as well. He even involved Peter van Ossanen, who doesn't remember him, for the famous wing keel. And he actually came up with the lines from Lionheart being the tallest of all ever been drawn to be the best boat to build. So then the decision was made, we're gonna build. But of course, it's still one of these things what you do, because who's having the copyrights, who's owning these plans? So they made a deal with Sparkman and Stevens. And finally, the boat was ready to getting built, and the hull was built at Bloemsma in the Netherlands. And then the boat was finished off at Claessens, because that was one other thing what the new owner said as well. I want to have a fantastic sailing boat, but I want to cruise with it as well. I want to have a beautiful interior. I want to take my family out. And of course, if we go doing racing, then I want to beat up the competition, so I want to have the fastest.
So the most comfortable, the fastest, is there anything they didn't ask for at the time?
Well, you know how all these owners are. They're all winners. So they don't leave anything off the hook. But whenever they can make a step, and I think that was really good with Lionheart. They had a really good guy. Nigel Ingram was involved in it. He's had done a lot of experience with big boats. And so they actually got a really nice concept together. Maybe one interesting thing is to tell, probably a lot of people have been telling the rig of Lionheart, the top looks really, really big compared to all the other J's, because their plan was actually to build a rig without the little jumpers on the top. But then they gave the plans to the J class, and they said the rig needs to have jumpers. So all the homework was done for nothing, and the jumpers had to get back on. So that's a little side story.
All right. All right, Peter, Topaz, I think another, it's interesting where I think a lot of these boats started off their life under a different ownership group that really didn't see it to the end. And I think Topaz is another one of these, right?
Yeah, correct. I actually called Andre Hoek this morning to brush up on my facts to make sure I get it right. And as Bauer just said, some very interesting history. As he pointed out, that owner came for the project before. And Andre dug up 12 available line drawings that were possible to build. He then created the VPP program in-house, tested them all, came up with his top 5 candidates. Then they did the CFD work, narrowed it down to 3, and Lionheart was the top choice. And that's how that one came about. Second choice here was Topaz, and third was Svea. And with all 3 of those boats, they each had an original owner start it and a different owner complete it.
Yep.
So Topaz here, the current owner is a German family, and they came to Andre's office looking for a J boat. They had seen the show that had been resurrected by Elizabeth, and came knocking, and Andre pointed him to this boat that was halfway built, and the boat yard, Holland Yacht Bow, had completed it themselves and had it almost ready to go. And the current owner came in and fell in love with it, and that's the current story of Topaz. And up she came. She was designed in 1935 by Frank Payne, who was the designer of Yankee, that was designed and built for the Cup period. And this one, Topaz, was designed in 1935, and in its current form, it got launched in 2015.
Amazing. Yeah, well, I guess I'm going to be a little quicker. I've actually had the chance, I don't know how many of you guys, I've sailed on 3 of these boats. Ranger, a number of years ago, for a couple of events, and then Hanneman, as I said earlier, this is a replica of Endeavor 2 for American owners, and then of course Svea, and Svea is really another really interesting story, and it's also owned by an American who's incredibly passionate about sailing and has had a number of different types of boats, and nothing like this. Kind of fell in love with the concept. He considers this his race boat. You go down below in it, and it's got more wood in the interior than my house does. But this is his race boat. And project manager Charlie Ogletree, in essence, they found this boat. It was also partially built. It was going to be a Dutch owner originally, and the Dutch owner was, I think eccentric is the wrong word, but he kind of a minimalist, I guess, and he wanted to do like a really bare, stripped out bare, a lot of metal in the interior. He thought that was beautiful, and the class essentially said, and I'll show you a photo of the interior in a minute. The class said, no, it has to be a world cruiser. It has to match all the rest. We don't want to get, and for the reason of we don't want to give advantage to a boat that has a stripped out interior, when all of these boats literally have tons and tons and tons of wood inside of them to make these gorgeous interiors. So the boat became available. The owner and Charlie, and they put a team together and built an exquisite boat. And like all of these boats, it's a constant battle to try to figure out what the next evolution is of the boat. They don't come out perfect out of just because you're putting all this modern machinery on a boat that was conceived in the 30s. Just little things like the balance, all of a sudden we have sails that don't stretch, whereas in the 30s they were cotton sails, so they all stretch. So what does that do to the actual balance, the steering balance of the boat? Another interesting part about Svea, it was designed, and Peter told me earlier, so was Topaz. Some of these boats were designed with dagger boards. Now, unfortunately, for these designs, the rule actually specifically says, it's kind of like the jumpers that Bauer said, you cannot have a centerboard on these boats. So anyway, Svea and Topaz, they might have a little bit of it might be a little bit of a hindrance going upwind, probably because they don't have those dagger boards, but amazing boat, immaculate boat. And like all of these boats, great permanent crew, great leadership on board, and it's just a phenomenal boat to sail on. Here's the interior. So this is just your average race boat, right? Doesn't look like a TP-52 down below, from what I can gather. a couple of different versions. I think that the interiors of these boats, at least the ones I've seen, I've had the privilege to be down below on, they really reflect the owners, and just the finish and the hardware and the fittings. It's nothing short of spectacular, as one could imagine. So Tom, we're on to, how do you handle these boats? You've been doing this for a long time, and this is a little video. We can just talk right through it. I can't imagine what it was like to try to race these things, 20 years ago when you guys started on Balshida compared to how we're doing it now. Why don't you give us a little run through?
Yeah, well, the first, it sort of horrified you to start with. The spinnaker pole's 170 kilos, and the weight of the sails back then was hundreds and hundreds of kilos. So we had to really try and then as Ranger came along and we started racing against another J, everything got ramped up, and then ramped up again when the other 4 or 5 Js came in. So I think probably philosophically, the first thing that we tried to do was try to make it feel like a smaller boat. And that was just, the first thing was to speed up the winch power. As I say, lighter sails helped. And then the next thing was to say, look, we're struggling to get our calls, from the back to the front of the boat. And on Balshida, it's a long way. The helm position where the navigator and tactician and strategist are to the bow, is the full length of the boat pretty much. So most of us were starting with Team New Zealand at the time, and we were starting comm systems back then, and leading up to the 2000 Cup. And so we got pretty close with the same company down here in New Zealand, and now the boat's got about 7 different communication loops going from the front to the back. The helmsman talks to the bowman in the pre-start, and the navigator's in on that loop as well. After the start, the helmsman's on an open mic with the two trimmers at the time, and the Jannar trimmer upwind and the spinnaker trimmer downwind. I'm on an open mic with Juggy, who's our crew boss. And so probably the trickiest time is coming into the bottom mark gate. And, that's in any boat really, but in one of these, you want to keep your options open, whether you're going left gate or right gate, especially when you're in traffic, like you can see on the screen here. And then to be able to do that with, as I say, a 170 kilo pole there, and you can't drop the jib on the pole, or you can't hoist the jib if the pole's on top of it. All those sort of things that basically a smaller boat crew has to deal with. We got systems going on our foredeck, especially back into the trimmers, where they can pretty well handle now, the hoisting the Jannar and coming into a bottom mark gate as if it was in a 40 or 50 footer. And that's a huge compliment to the amount of practice that the guys forward in the boat do. From the tactician's point of view, your main thing is you have to really start to understand what's possible and what's not possible, and make it as easy as you can with the crew, but the boat beside you is trying to make it as hard as it can for you. So I get to understand what's possible, and then I'm having a quick conversation with the crew boss, Juggy, to say, mate, this is what we want to do, and then he's got a countdown on the mast, and we could be calling that to him as well in the comms loop of the times to go to the bottom mark. And then everything starts to work backwards, and the guys, as Bauer said at the start of it, the people are really starting to think for themselves at that stage. They know what the maneuver is. We've practiced it quite dozens of times, and then it all goes pretty quiet after that.
So Pete, as these boats have been getting pushed harder and sailed just unbelievably efficient. Coming out of out of dinghies, that's your original sailing, but tell everybody what's it like driving one of these bloody things, and yeah.
Yeah. That's probably one of the hardest things, the people will probably appreciate. These things are 180 tons, and you see the rudder in those line drawings and what a small piece they are in that whole underbody. And it's really just getting used to what they're capable of doing and not capable of doing.
Right.
There's no second decisions. There's one long thought out one. Once you commit to a maneuver, that process is pretty much underway. Any corrections you do, they just, it's like sitting in a airplanes going very slowly on a runway. Those rudder flaps do nothing for you.
Right.
Hardly at all. So yeah, but that's Kenny, that's what we loved about it. I compare it with match racing. We match raced a lot of small, nimble boats, and we found that we all loved Bermuda, where we race these IODs, which is a very similar. It's just so hard to get it right. Mm-hmm. That's what these J's are for me too. As a helmsman, I play a part, as Tom talks about, in orchestrating the whole show, and just knowing what it's capable of doing and getting that whole orchestra to all get in sync and play out in the.
And that's an orchestra. That's what about it? How many people are on Topaz, Pete?
Well, the rule allows us 35. We've had up to 40 at times, but there's a permanent crew of 5 on board to operate the boat, and then we show up with 25 of our race crew, and then owners and guests gets up to 35 usually.
Yeah. Keeping everybody moving in the right direction. I mean, Bauer, we were talking earlier about how do you get 30 people not to think for themselves, but to think for the team. And what's interesting, I'm gonna go back and forth here a couple times. What's interesting is Valshita in this picture, you see the wheel all the way back on the transom. Then a couple of the other boats, the wheel is moved forward, but there's cabin houses in the way, and there's cockpits that guests sit in, or cockpits that winches are in. I mean, every boat is so dramatically different. So, Bauer, how do you get the bloody team to work as one? It's a challenge.
Well, it's a huge challenge, because I think just a little bit of step back, like it's a learning process, and I think Lionheart is a classic example, because when our owners bought the boat, they never have been racing, and the first time I met him was in Cannes, and they did a little classic regatta over there, and he said, I want to enter in this class and I want to do well. So I heard that you can sail, so put me a team together. So here you are, and start thinking, okay, you're trying to find the key persons. And I just said as well, together with the project manager, said, okay, this is our budget, that's what we have to do it for. But how many guests do the owner wants to bring? And he said, well, he's having about 8 or 9. I said, well, that's really nice, because I think it's good to be involved as well. And what does he want? Does he want to drive himself, or does he want me to drive? And he said, well, he wants you to drive. And then I said, just hold on. I think he's owning the boat. He should actually drive his own bus. I call it always sailing on the bus, because it's one of these things, and we know it from all the one design classes, like the 540, in the Melgis 32, most of the owners are driving. In the 540, the owners have to drive. And I think it gives so much extra for themselves to give that feeling of driving their own boat in a race. So that's how we started off with Lionheart, and we got a team together with only 7 professionals, really top professionals, all specialists in their own place. Then the permanent crew, he had quite a few friends, and of course there's a lot of people who wants to drive, wants to sail on a boat like this. So we actually were with a team of 35, where the owner is sharing the driving together with his son. But one of the things what we did from the beginning, because we were not the best in the beginning, was just every day we had debriefs, and we evolved that and became better and better in the debriefs. We had 7, 8 cameras in the end, and everybody was involved in the debrief. So when you're doing maneuvers, you speak them through, you cannot just explain them. You really have to show people where they're making mistakes, because from mistakes you can, of course, you can learn. And I think that is one of the big processes what we had on Lionheart, is just going through maneuver after maneuver and doing practicing. They always say, oh, that's Bao again. He wants to go out at 8 and comes back at 6 o'clock. Because you win the trophies not by just rocking up for an event. You have to practice. And I think that's one of the key things, what you need to be on these boats. Because if you have such a big team, and I think that's one of the things as well, you see most of these teams now sail for a long time together, because they are so specific and everybody's having a very critical position on each spot where he is. So it's really a team sport, and that you have to oil. You have to practice, get better and better at it.
Yeah. Tom mentioned that crew boss. The crew boss is essentially, you have kind of bosses on these boats, don't you, in different sections, and the crew boss kind of floats around the middle of the boat and really helps choreograph the sails going up and down. And when I say they're starting to go up and down, like somebody said, like far 40s coming into the leeward mark, they really are. So, you know, in a way, we are in the time of Vanderbilt and Sopwith, because they drove their own boats too, you know. So it's pretty good. And Peter, as one of the pro drivers, because every boat has its obviously. The owners have their right to do whatever they want to do. If they don't feel comfortable doing it, they have somebody else come in and drive. But the boats are almost so hard to drive that it takes away the advantage from a pro sailor, because they kind of have a mind of their own sometimes. They kind of wander around where they want to, and it's not like you can be perfect, can you?
No, yeah, very true. And Tom's owner probably has more hours driving Valshita than any of us, and he's probably the best J helmsman out there today. So it's so unique in its behavior and characteristics that you got to figure it out. And every owner has their choice. Our owner's training. The wife has actually taken the most interest in racing the boat, and she's been learning to drive, and at the right time on the right part of the course, she loves steering as well.
No, that's great. Tom always told me it was the tactics. That was why Valshita looked like they were going so fast. But anyway, so Bauer, one more thing before we move on is we were talking about ways to. I think good sailors, like they talk about this America's Cup and how this America's Cup, this mono hull, and getting it to foil and getting it around the race course, it's going to be impossible. Good sailors always figure out a way to make boats go around a race course efficiently and fast. This spinnaker system, and you guys were pretty integral into helping develop this crazy leeward mark spinnaker system, more like a 505 than a J class. So why don't you take us through it? Well, first of all, take us back to the days where we literally had 15 people on the bow trying to drag a spinnaker down.
Yeah, it was actually in our second season. We started doing a little better, but it's still like what Tom said before as well. You're coming into the leeward mark, and it's just like 5 minutes out. You have to start making a plan already. How are we going to approach? Which mark you're gonna round? Trying to get the picture right, which there's nobody coming on starboard. Do we have to make an extra jog? But you roughly knew, without having a takedown system, it always took like a minute. The jib had to go up, and you had to start dropping the kite. And of course, sometimes you had a fantastic drop, and the sail was down in 40 seconds. But in general, just it was a struggle, and we dropped quite a few actually spinnakers in the water and broke them. So it was in the winter, I was just started thinking, how can we make a system that we not can do the same as what you say on the 505? So we just took the bull at the horns, and actually the whole season we did conventional drop downs in Mahon and in Parma. And then the last event we did in Saint-Tropez, we just said, okay, we're getting a drop system, and here you can see it. And with actually the drop system, what we had in the beginning, of course, was first trying it out. So we just had a wooden hoop with a piece of cloth, like a crew cone laying on the deck, where the spinnaker actually gets pulled in. But it is a lot of coordination, because you see the big spinnaker polers up here, and it's great that in this shot there is there's no jib up, because normally, of course, the jib is up as well. But if you had just the right takedowns, we just managed to get the sail down in 15 seconds before the mark. So, and with these boats, they're having so much momentum. And that was one of the main reasons why I was thinking about developing this system, because we knew the year after we're going to Bermuda and even Newport, where the Worlds were later on, were relatively light air events. So if you can drop the spinnaker right next to the mark, more or less, you have a lot of momentum, and the boat goes fast around the mark, and you're actually creating your own apparent wind speed, because the boat is still having speed. So we just have been refining that, and in like what we did in Saint-Tropez the year before, we sailed miles away from everybody, start trying it out, and it was just amazing. We just said, this is a winning ticket. Yep. And then in the winter, we had one windy event in Antigua. We did a couple of practice days as well, and managed some other things. And we said, okay, we're having something on our sleeve over here. But that is always, I think it's one of these things you have to approach it in a way that you believe you can do, and everybody gets involved, and pulled it off, because we had a fantastic year. And it was mainly because we made a development what gave us just a little bit of extra, because everybody is always right sailing to the edge.
Right. It's pretty scary sometimes on board. You see, essentially, you got to drop it, right? So this is Svea, and you know, Jamie Gale is the crew boss on Svea, and he's counting down. And essentially, we're not all religious people, but you see a few of these, you know, as this thing is coming down, and if it doesn't suck into the tube, you got a little bit of a major on your hands. So anyway, very well done by your team and by the group who's now commercializing this concept, and it's really making its way into a lot of bigger boats, into a lot of super yachts, this system. But Greg, as we move on, you know, the efficiency, this is Svea has this unbelievable, this is the newest of the boats, has an unbelievably nice deck layout for maneuvering, but the efficiency of winch systems and all the stuff that goes down below in these boats, it's what allows us to be able to do it. Because if you didn't, Greg, if you don't have a winch that's fast enough, it doesn't matter. You're not gonna suck that spinnaker in nearly fast enough. It's going to end up in the drink. And here we are. I'd rather literally shoot myself than have to try to figure out what is going on down below in these things. But some people love it, and I know you're one of them.
I mean, these things are their own city. You know, you provide your own electricity, water, sewage treatment, refrigeration, everything. But then when we take them racing, as you said, the hydraulics, the important part. When we really started racing Hanneman, we were using 3 winches in the same time to get our jib hoists, because right. Valshita was using 1 winch, and Tom mentioned in the early days it was 1 minute and 30 seconds for a hoist. With 3 winches in first gear, we did a 9-second hoist of a Genoa. And then once we started doing it, it became that let's push hydraulics. All the boats now can pretty much do this kind of hoists, where the boats run anywhere from 17 winches, I think, for Svea, averaging around 21. And I think Valshita's got 1.7 million winches.
26.
Yeah.
26 winches. It makes you almost want to get into the winch business.
Some of them are manual, mind you, top handles.
Is that right? How many still are top handle?
Well, the main ones are the runner winches, which we have 3 massive guys bringing the runner up, and a lot of it with Valshita is we'd like to have a deck layout and the winch power the modern boats go with, but we're restricted by the amount of hoses and power that we can get to it. So we work with what we've got.
So Greg, here on Svea, again, they had the opportunity to really create a nice functional working layout, but again, winches everywhere. So how do you, and all of them are push button on this boat, how do you bloody power the system used? And by the way, for the first time ever, as sailors, as sailors on a super yacht, and I consider this a super yacht, we actually were turning the speed of the winches down a little bit because they actually went too fast. That was the first time I had ever imagined that on a big boat in a racing scenario. So how do you power all these things?
Yeah, I mean, the day that Tony asked me to turn down the primaries was a happy day.
Exactly.
But we power them off the gen sets and the main engine. So we're running power takeoff. So we're using the full engine capacity of a generator, sometimes two, plus another on the main engine. Ranger is now going to have two on the main engine and one on each generator. Doing that, we can make, we're running really high pressures, almost 4,000 PSIs of hydraulic pressure. And we can power 7 winches at full chat off the PTOs at one time. And some of the loads, I mean, we pull, 210 meters a minute on a winch, and we can pull at 13 tons on the primaries. So, I mean, they're big, powerful systems. I don't think if every single person was grinding, we still would have half the hydraulic load that we can produce on the engines.
Here we go again. Every boat that gets a refit, everybody ramps it up again. I mean, this is the masts and the sails and the carbon rigging. Bauer mentioned or Tom mentioned the carbon rigging before. Tom, just the mast and sail matching now, and the fact that it's all carbon. We went back to the original J class America's Cup was a wood mast versus the first aluminum mast, and here we are, carbon everything. We couldn't sail these boats half as efficient as we do without all this stuff, right?
No, well, we actually we had a carbon mast originally in Valshita when I got on it, but even that was so heavy compared to what we've got now that I remember one day in Saint-Tropez, you had one of those massive swells coming side shore into the bay there, and the boat was just hobby horsing and jumping, we couldn't sail it in the end. We had to drop the sails and motor in.
Right.
Now the competition's come along, and the spreader geometry's just got shorter and shorter, and sheeting the sails closer, and not to mention, well, they've got a minimum weight now in the class, which is, or they're starting to rate the weight of the rigs. So that's stopped the real chase there. But having your Genoa, you see the overlapping Genoa there, being able to sheet that in so hard has been a major, which we've changed on Valshita last season. We shortened up a couple of our spreaders, which meant we had to grunt up our rigging, and we were one of the first super yachts to go to the continuous EC6 carbon rigging, and now I believe we're the first one to go to the solid carbon of a North product or a Southern product. So we're thrilled with that result. The rig's just very stable in the boat. Yeah.
So it's new age versus old age, the new age equipment that allows us to sail these boats as effectively as they're sailed. But I mean, Pete and Bauer, you guys have been sailing, I mean, in a given month, in a given couple weeks, you could be, Peter, you could be sailing a TP52 one weekend and the next weekend sailing a J boat. How the heck? I think a lot of people wonder how the heck can you I mean, it just couldn't be more opposite.
Yeah, you got to keep adjusting your time and distance and your swing ratio if you think of doing a maneuver, you know. But you know, you ride a bike, you can ride a big bike, and as you all know, once you sail a boat, every boat's the same in many ways. You know, it's balance, it's all those little things that get it in its sweet spot and going fast. And I love the variety. You know, I think it just adds color to life to race the TP52s, which is one of the hottest, best class I've ever sailed, and then step over into one of the hardest, most challenging, most rewarding boats I've ever sailed. That's just makes it all special. So
yeah, Bauer, same thing. I mean, you even throw a bigger wrench into it, is so much of the stuff that you've been doing in the last bit has been offshore, but still light, fast, crazy speeds versus loads, big loads.
Well, I think the biggest difference, of course, is that you're coming every night back at the dock with the J class, and that is, of course, it's a really nice aspect. But it all comes down to the team, and I think it's one of these things as well. Even when we were doing the preparations for the last race for the Volvo, I just said to our owners, I love to do the races in Bermuda and in Newport, because it's still, you're racing against the best guys, and racing is just, you have to keep doing it. The more you do it, the better you stay on top, the more things you can learn either from your crew or from the competition. And that's, it doesn't matter what boat you are. You're sailing in a little Optimist or you're sailing around the world. It's just, you have to keep doing it. And you can't do it, of course, in a single-handed boat, you're by yourself. But if you're sailing around the world, it's the team. The team is everything. And we know that's I think what as well, what the J class, why guys are, why some teams are a little bit more successful than others. It's just that they're a little better and that they can just sail faster.
Right. Very cool. Well, we'll take it to a slight extreme. This is the J class in Bermuda, and we all had the opportunity to watch a couple of fairly high performers boats sail around down there. Things we get to see. Well, guys, I can't thank you enough for your time. It's the history. The history has not been lost on the J class, on the J class owners, and that's really fortunate, because these things are so legendary to sail. And both my experience with Hanneman and the experience with now with Svea has taught me so much. Just not just about sailing, but the teams, the people. For me, it's the people that make a big difference. And it's so much, it's just incredible technology to make these boats go. But Bauer, just give a quick few seconds. J class to you.
J class is just, it's the history. That's where the really racing began. And of course, super fortunate to sail with an owner and a team who won the last World Championship, and just proud to be on board and to make it happen and to get the sails up and down, and to have just that great experience to just say, guys, I've been racing on a J.
Pete?
Yeah, I would say for me, it's the incredible challenge. I don't have the history side from studying or watching it or following it. It is absolutely the most difficult thing to achieve and get these boats around the track with a team this big. So the ultimate challenge, and then to also make it special for me is, you know, in today's world of faster, higher, quicker mobile devices, I think it's pretty good to go back to the fundamentals in our sport and get it right with a team of guys. So that's what does it for me.
Tom, what do you think?
Oh, the owners, for me, I mean, they're the same kind of people who were back in the 30s. They're colourful, they're obviously incredible, successful, and they're just fun to be around. And they get other people, like-minded people, with them. So that's why I always enjoy going to regattas, and you're never bored.
You're never
Yeah.
bored. Well, I think we lost Greg. Greg, are you still there? Yeah, I think Greg dropped out. Well, for me, it's all of the above. It's everything you guys said. We get to sail these things in some amazing places around the world. These incredible machines, the people, the personalities, the modern day Harold Vanderbilts and TOM Sopwiths. We owe all these people a lot, and there's no question that every place you go to and you're out sailing on one of these boats, any boat that's within shouting range or even vision of the boat stops what they're doing and starts taking photos. These are the most photographed boats in the history of mankind. So with that said, I think we've run our course. We're exactly an hour, so we're gonna finish this thing up. On behalf of North Sails and all of us who are out there sailing, all of our panel here with our J class webinar, I just like to thank everybody for coming on a Saturday afternoon or a Saturday evening or a Sunday morning, wherever you happen to be. Again, in this crazy, unprecedented time, we hope that everybody's staying healthy, doing the right thing. And making sure that when we do come out of this, we're all ready to get back on the water. I haven't said this in a long time. I can't wait to go sailing again. For a bunch of people who go sailing for a living for the most part, I think I speak for all of our panel. We can't wait to go sailing again. I know that everybody who's tuning into something like this is obviously an avid sailor and thinks the same way. So stay healthy. And thank you so much again, and thanks to all the people at North Sails who are behind the scenes helping put this on. As of last count, we on our YouTube channel we've had 3,000 hours of watch time on the webinars so far over the last few weeks. So thank you to all the people from North Sails behind the scenes making this happen. Like I said at the beginning, we're going to keep doing this for education and for entertainment, and to give people a little bit of look behind the curtain as to what it's like sailing some of these crazy boats. So again, I'm Ken Reed, and thank you so much for coming, and we'll see you all next time.